Okay, moving on to our second story of the evening. Now, on last week's episode of Grid Tonight, we discussed the possibility of David Malukas losing his IndyCar seat before getting to drive a single race for his new team. Now, rumors were swirling around the paddock and in the media, but we finally have an official answer now. After Malukas went dark on his social media pages on Sunday night, we received a press release from Arrow McLaren early on Monday morning announcing the team released him from his contract. Now, Malukas signed with the team last September and hoped to prove himself at a top team after taking the number 6 Chevrolet that was supposed to be Alex Palou's seat as well. The photo taken by Joe Sabinski from Penske Entertainment. Now, David Malukas has released a statement saying, "The past 3 months have been challenging. I felt privileged to have had the opportunity to drive for Arrow McLaren and regret that it never materialized. I would have loved to have continued representing the team and its partners going forward. They have been good and I appreciate all they have done for me. I've done everything possible to speed up the rehab process, treatments, physiotherapy, strength training, but my recovery has taken longer than anticipated. Every injury is different and every body heals at a different pace. I'll turn my full attention to getting back to 100% and then prove I am ready and capable and able to compete to win." That's from David Malukas there from Arrow McLaren as well. Now, in the past, cold affects vision. Interesting take, Josh. Yeah, because it's really wild because my nose goes thingy because I can't breathe out my nose. I've got a permanently broken nose at the top. I don't know. So that sort of just mucks me up. So I sneeze and then my eyes go like that. So I can't see. Long story. But yeah, cold affects it. So yeah, in the past, we've seen how McLaren treated James Hinchcliffe, Father Rasky, Felix Rosenquist, of course, and now David Malukas. So are they now on the same level, as Kobe mentioned right at the top of the show? Are they at the same level of Red Bull's ruthlessness in how they handle drivers?
I don't know if I say they're on the same level as Red Bull yet, but I say if there's a step under Red Bull, they might just be knocking on the door. It's just been really crazy to see how McLaren has treated its IndyCar drivers in recent years. You mentioned starting with James Hinchcliffe. He got let go very late in the offseason, when all of the competitive rides were taken, and Hinchcliffe, had to try to scramble and find a racing program in IndyCar for the next year. It was just the timing that was really bad for Hinch there. And, all of the rumors suggested that it was his ESPN body shoot that he did that, that caused McLaren to be like, yeah, Hinch, we're going to use this as an excuse to move on. But then we know Oliver Askew had that heart crash in the Indy 500, suffered a concussion, and then it made the team look bad, that he returned to on-track action and he had a concussion when he really shouldn't have been behind the wheel. And then Askew got cut after that, and Felix Rosenquist, they kind of strung him along for the last few years. Rosenquist was under so much pressure, and they even offered to let him stay with McLaren as long as it went over to Formula E. But Rosenquist truly wanted to stay in IndyCar series, so they kind of just strung him along. And we've seen a much different Felix Rosenquist this year in the few races he's had with Meyer Shank Racing, which really shows you, that the McLaren environment, was not really the best for him. And now we're talking about David Malukas. I don't really have much to say, especially since we've been talking about this in the last few weeks, especially on last week's show. But it's super unfortunate what happened to David Malukas. But like I said last week, this is a business, and McLaren had to do what they felt was best for the business. It doesn't make it right, for say, but this is what they felt like they had to do to move forward. And I really hate this for David Malukas because I really feel like that he could have really turned some heads in this ride, one of the top teams in IndyCar, but now we won't ever get to see him drive a McLaren. I just hope moving forward that he'll be able to get back on the IndyCar grid when he's fully healthy, and we can potentially see what he can do with another team, and maybe he'll have another shot to drive for another top team in the NTT IndyCar series. But it's definitely been quite ruthless how McLaren has treated their IndyCar drivers. But at the same time, when looking at David Malukas, he still has to, take some accountability for his actions as well. If he wasn't, riding that mountain bike, this would have never happened. But at the same time, you can't put drivers on a bubble and tell them, what they can and can't do. They have to be allowed to live their lives as well. Although I know some racing team owners put things in drivers' contract, like stuff they can't do or all that. Like, for example, some drivers can't race sprint cars during the season or whatever because you don't want them to suffer an injury, and then you miss time at your day job and all of that. It's just a really tough, complicated situation when you come to those situations as well. And Adam Limmery said he feels sorry for David Malukas, said he couldn't drive one lap for Arrow McLaren. Yeah, really tough break. You sign a contract with an iconic brand like McLaren and not able to even drive one single lap under competition for that team.
Yeah, not much more to add, Kobe, to what you've said, really. It is from looking at it from the outside worldly view of it, it is a big shame for David, because we all kind of thought potentially this was his big chance to become an IndyCar Series winner. Proved over the last couple of years what speed he has, especially on the ovals. I know Matthew Owens, who is watching tonight, was very high on the chances of him getting a great result at the 500. First mention of that in May on the show, and it just hasn't come to pass. And you look like he was going to slide in there with a big team with two good experienced teammates with Rossi and O'Ward alongside him, and for him not to even get a lap in a competitive session for the team, it's just unfortunate. Let's hope this isn't the end of what was potentially a rising star in the series chance of showing really what he had to do, or could do, should I say, in a really good piece of equipment.
Yes, and Arrow McLaren says they are finalising its driver lineup for the number 6 Chevrolet for the rest of the 2024 Entity IndyCar season, and will make an announcement at a later date. Now, so far, we've seen Callum Milot and Theo Pourchaire share the ride, but both drivers have several conflicting schedules throughout the season. Ilott is currently competing full-time in the FIA World Endurance Championship, and when looking at the WEC schedule, the Spa round conflicts with the IMS road course, Sao Paulo conflicts with the Iowa doubleheader, Kota conflicts with Milwaukee, and Fuji conflicts with Nashville, the season finale. Meanwhile, looking at Pourchaire's Super Formula schedule, Autopolis conflicts with the Indy 500 qualifying, Sergo conflicts with Laguna Seca, Fuji conflicts with Toronto, and Motegi conflicts with Portland as well. Now, Ilott and Pourchaire could share the car for the majority of the remaining races, but McLaren may have to add another driver into the mix. There's always the possibility that McLaren could buy out Ilott or Pourchaire's contracts overseas to have their focus on IndyCar. Meanwhile, the future remains uncertain for David Malukas. There's still no clear timeline for his return to competition, and losing his seat before getting to drive for McLaren is a tough punch to the gut. Now, according to Nathan Brown from the Indy Star, McLaren moved on from Malukas after 4 races because it triggered a clause in his contract, and the longer they waited meant the possibility of going to court over false promise. It's better to cut ties sooner rather than later. Maybe a reunion with Dale Coyne Racing could be in the cards later in the season when he's healthy. The number 51 Honda still has more races available. His dad's team, HMD Motorsports, has explored the idea of starting an IndyCar team in the past, but something like that wouldn't materialize during this current season as well. So, Matt, starting with you on this one, do you see Arrow McLaren buying out any contracts or adding a veteran driver to the number 6 Chevrolet? And what do you think best path for Lucas to return to IndyCar?
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned all the scheduling conflicts there between the two guys that have shared the ride so far, Callum Ilott and Theo Pourchaire. We know that I think Ilott has unfinished business in IndyCar with what happened at Juncos last year. Pourchaire still has his sights set on Formula One. I kind of feel like that might be a bridge too far potentially for him. And we talked about the Formula One driver market plenty over the last couple of weeks, and will do so coming up over the next couple of months, I'm sure. But I kind of don't think that Pourchaire, unless he, can go in there, and he's had a decent couple of runs. Was very good at Long Beach a couple of weeks ago, as I mentioned, I think in Pots and Knots a couple of weeks ago. But it's going to be interesting to see what they do. Will they bring in a veteran? I think Tony Kanaan's retired from the IndyCar twice, and it was a big one last year at the 500. That was his last race. Will they sweet talk Tony to come back and do the 500 in a couple of weeks' time? Interesting to see what happens there. I really don't know how this one is going to play out. Or will we just have a a swap deal between those two going on throughout the season. I feel like the 500 is a bit too soon for Porsche because he's not driven apart from in the sim on any ovals. So that will be a huge eye opener for him. And obviously, quite as you mentioned, just qualifying clashes, so he probably won't be able to make the race anyway. So yeah, lots of balls up in the air for McLaren. They, as I mentioned in the group chat for us in the week, and kind of forgot to mention in my first question answer, the Erebus Motorsport of the IndyCar paddock. If we go back to our Supercars chat from earlier on in the year with the whole Brody Kostecki saga, but the ball is in the court of Zach Brown in the driver market in IndyCar. Oh, we've heard that one before, haven't we?
Yeah, Josh, you mentioned the possibility of going to court over false promises has been the reason why, they decided to move on from David Malukas, given how everything's been going with McLaren in the last year or so with driver contracts and all of that. I think they kind of want to break from being in the courtroom. So from that perspective, I totally understand wanting to move on, because we've heard enough about McLaren's at Brown, legal dramas, especially from the Alex Palou saga and all of that. So I think McLaren's like, we've seen enough of courtrooms in the last year. We don't need to prolong our time standing in front of a judge and all of that. But yeah, Matt, I'd agree with you. It's definitely quite a tricky situation here. It's going to be interesting to see what Arrow McLaren decides to do here. And Zuka says that rumor has it that the number 6 car will be Callum Ilott for the Indy 500. Yeah, I've also heard those rumors as well, especially since Ilott did the open test with Arrow McLaren in that number 6 car, and Callum Ilott had a really good run last year in the Indy 500. So it would not surprise me if he ends up getting to run in the greatest spectacle in racing in just several weeks' time. And in terms of buying out contracts, I think it really comes down to what the team wants to do and what the driver's other team wants to do. Would Joda Sport be willing to make a deal with McLaren to let Callum Ilott go from his WC duties to focus on IndyCar? And we already saw, Callum, not Ilott, Theo Pourchaire, he was announced very late to run Long Beach, because McLaren and Sauber, they were trying to come up with an agreement to let Pourchaire run that race. So if they had a hard time getting Sauber to agree to a deal to let Pourchaire race in Long Beach at the very last minute, how hard is it going to be for them to get Pourchaire released from his contract and all of that? And like you mentioned, Josh, Theo Pourchaire is still on, or was Matt, that Theo Pourchaire is still on the road to F1, that there's still a possibility he could be a Formula One driver, especially been the most recent F2 champion. But the thing is, we don't know what the marketplace is going to look like for him in 2025. We don't know if there's going to be a seat for him on the grid next year or the year after that. So I think Theo Pourchaire, if he wants to have his contract bought up by McLaren so he can come focus on IndyCar, it really seems like he's interested in moving to IndyCar full time in the future. If he truly believes there's no path for him to go to Formula One, and if he's enjoying his time in IndyCar, I say why not, especially since it's the very first race of the Super Formula season did not go well for Theo Pourchaire. So he's way down in the standings right now after that first race weekend. So if he wanted to, try out the rest of this year, see if he likes IndyCar, why not, especially if you think that Formula One is not going to be in the cars at all. And I think if they wanted to add a veteran driver to the lineup, you obviously have the likes of Connor Daly and Ryan Hunter-Reay out there. So those could be some great veteran options if they wanted to add one to the mix there. And in regards to David Malukas, I'm not really sure what's going to happen there. I think a return to Delcoin Racing would probably be his best bet, especially if he gets sealed up and there's some races available later in the year. I think that would be great. But I also think some other teams could be interested in Malukas as well, because I still believe that he has the potential to be a star in the IndyCar series in the making.